FM.
Stay relevant and up to date. Keep informed. This is 101.9 High FM.
You're listening to 101.9 High FM. I'm Benji Shulman, and this is the New Blue Review. Welcome to the program. Now, if you might remember, a few years ago, there was a very audacious plan by an Israeli guy to get the world off of oil. And how did he want to do that? He wanted to create a proper grid of electric cars, and he created a company. It was called Better Place, where he decided that he was going to rid the world of oil dependency by creating electric cars, and he was going to start off by doing this in Israel and then going all around the world. And he made huge waves. He raised nearly $1 billion in funding, and then it all kind of fell apart, even though there was all this hype and all this interest. And a guy, he is a tech reporter in Israel, has decided to write this story up so that people can understand what it means to fail when it comes to a startup, because we often hear about the successes, and also, what it means to really chase one's dream and try and change the world, and how it sometimes is successful and sometimes isn't. So I'm very happy to have on the show today Brian Blum, who is the author of the book Untitled, talking us today. How's it, Brian? How are you doing? Welcome to the New Blue Review.
Thank you, Benji. Nice to be here.
So, first of all, give us a context. Shai Agassi, he's the founder of Better Place. Why did he decide that he wanted to go for this thing in the first place?
Shai Agassi is one of the most creative and charismatic and powerful entrepreneurs I think Israel has ever seen. He was an executive at SAP, the large software infrastructure company, and he was also a part of a group called the Forum of Young Global Leaders that met at Davos, Switzerland, part of the World Economic Forum. And they were charged every year with trying to do something big in the world. And the charge that year was to figure out some way to make the world a better place. And Shai Agassi, the entrepreneur here, felt that the best way to sort of move the needle on climate change and the environment and things that could really make the world a better place was to try to move cars away from gasoline-powered cars to electric-powered cars. And they worked on a plan, and they worked with some Stanford students he and a partner to build this plan up. It was really incredibly exciting back in 2007 when it got started.
Now, one of the interesting parts about Better Place is that they thought that they would, if you'll forgive the expression, test drive this idea in Israel. What was the basis behind that decision? Was he just being patriotic, or was there other factors involved?
There definitely was a patriotic aspect, because it could have started anywhere. In fact, the company was founded in Silicon Valley, not in Israel, although R&D quickly moved to Israel. And but we are an island here in Israel, and that made a lot of sense for the Better Place model. Now, what do I mean by an island? We're not an island, but we are surrounded on all sides by borders. We've got the Mediterranean on one side, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt. So we can't really drive outside the boundaries of the state of Israel. Now, the Better Place model was, how can we get past what has been a real gating factor for electric cars, which is what we call in the business range anxiety. And that's the fear that you're going to be driving and you're going to run out of electricity somewhere in the middle of nowhere. There's not going to be a charging spot or a station or anything like that. So how can you allow, a car to go anywhere? And this based on the technology that existed in 2007 when the company started. And at that point, electric cars couldn't go 300-400 kilometers like a Tesla or a GM or today's modern electric cars can go. They could go about 100 kilometers, maybe 120 kilometers maximum. So that meant that you really couldn't go very far from your home charging spot. So the Better Place idea was, let's put battery switching stations all over the country. So every 120 kilometers, if you needed to keep going, you wouldn't have to plug in and wait for the car to charge. You would drive into this station, look kind of like a gas station or a car wash. Your car would get lifted up on a platform. A robot would come in underneath the car, take the spent battery out, and put a brand new filled-in battery in, and in 5 minutes, you'd be up and running, and on you go. And now, the reason I say all that is, in Israel, you could cover the entire country with just 42 stations. You could go everywhere from Jerusalem to the Golan to Eilat to Tel Aviv, and you can't do that in a vast territory like the United States.
And technology was actually a big part of the whole selling point of Better Places. It wasn't just these switching stations, which were a little bit high-tech to begin with. The whole basis was that they would be able to track the electricity. You'd be able to track how much kilometerage you still had to drive. So actually technology was a key point in trying to sell the electric cars as a differentiator from petrol cars.
When you have an electric car and you're worried about running out of juice, having the sophisticated software on your dash in your car, they called it Oscar, which stands for Operating System for Cars. Oscar, so everybody just called it Oscar. It's not Oscar the Grouch from Sesame Street, but Oscar. And the screen would tell you exactly what your charge was. It's monitoring the car. It would tell you where the next battery switching station was, or the next charge spot. And if you needed to get there, it would actually plot your route on the GPS on the screen and take you there. And you could set up an entire trip. As I say, if you want to go to the north in Kiryat Shmona, it would tell you this is the route you need to go. Here's where the switching stations are. Here's how much time it's going to take. That part was very, very cool. Now, there were other aspects that were also part of the technology that were very cutting edge. For example, imagine that the grid, the electrical grid, is going to overload because everybody's plugging in their cars at once, and the air conditioners are all running. It's the summer, and the washing machines and the lights. And the system could kind of titrate, how much energy was going into the car, and how much. So, if you're plugged in, let's say at work, and it's going to take, 6 or 7 hours to get to a full charge, but that there's all these other demands on the system. So maybe the system would only give you 80% instead of 100% by the end of that period in order not to have the entire grid fall. That was part of the system as well.
So there are a lot of technology, and they tested it out in Israel, and it quickly spread. It went to a number of other countries where they were also now suddenly trying Better Place. Where else did it go?
So Better Place had operations in Denmark, where they actually built another 18 stations and had that working. They had a pilot plan for a battery switchable taxi that went between Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands to Amsterdam, and that would go back and forth. They had operations in China. They had a demonstration center in China, and they had plans to do partnerships with Chinese utilities. They had a pilot program for another switchable taxi system in Tokyo, Japan. In fact, the very first switching station, in the world was debuted in Yokohama, Japan, because the Japanese government wanted to see if they could prove that they could move their fleet from gasoline-powered cars to electric cars. And, of course, there was operations in Hawaii and in Canada and in Silicon Valley and offices all over Europe. It was really a global company, which in some ways tripped them up because there was a lot of money and attention being spent in different directions, and maybe it might have made more sense to just focus on Israel and or Denmark and not go everywhere else.
Well, we're going to be talking about that in just coming up after this. You're listening to 101.9 Chai FM. I'm Benji Shulman, and this is the New Blue Review. We're talking today to Brian Blum. He's just written a book called Totaled about the rise and fall of the Better Place company. We'll be back just after this.
A frequency like no other. 101.9 Chai FM.
101.9 Chai FM. I'm Benji Shulman, and this is the New Blue Review. We're talking today to Brian Blum. He has written a book called Totaled about the rise and fall of Better Place, an electric car company based in Israel. And if you're listening to us live, you can SMS us 34519 or WhatsApp us 061-895-1019, and we'll happily take any questions you might have for Brian. Brian, so they try to go all over the world, and obviously you don't want to give away the whole book, but what actually then went wrong? Because it actually sounds like they had got quite far down the road.
Before I actually tell you what went wrong, I just want to tell you a personal story about how I got into this, and then you'll see why it became such a passion for me to find out what went wrong. we actually were not, enormous electric car fans. We didn't plan on, buying an electric car. It was actually the summer of 2012. My family and I were looking for something to do on an August afternoon with the kids. We'd done everything else. We'd been to the beach and the movies and the zoo, and Better Place had this amazing visitor center set up in Piglilot, which is just south of Herzliya, north of Tel Aviv, and they were offering a movie and test drives, and we thought, well, that's a fun afternoon outing. Let's go do that, and we did. We all test drove the car, the adult drivers, and we fell in love. We fell in love with this car like on the spot. It was so powerful and quiet and green, and we, within 2 weeks we had put our money down on the car. Now, that's not like me. I usually, as a technology and business journalist, I do incredible amounts of research. I do my due diligence. I investigate things. But in this case, I just put the money down, and it literally was like a love affair. Within a month, before we even got our car, there was trouble in the company. The CEO, Shai Agassi, founder of the company, had been fired, and within another 8 months or so, the company was out of business entirely. And the journalist side of me said, how did I miss that? How did I like get blinded and not, realize something was going on in the company and not know that? How did the entire press miss that? And of course, the press will say, well, we saw it all along, but many people were taken in by the excitement and the hype. So the book is a result essentially of me trying to figure out what I missed. And now I can tell you what it is that I missed.
Well, I mean, before you do that, just like sort of on that point, how difficult a book was it to research? And it sounds like there were a lot of characters, a lot of people to interview. Were people like Shai Agassi prepared to talk to you on the record about what went wrong?
So I interviewed over 80 different people, former Better Place executives, car owners, investors. I spoke to, enough people that I think I got the story right. It took about 3.5 years to research and write. Shai Agassi was not one of the people that I got a chance to speak to. We did speak, but he was very unsure about how a journalist would tell the story. He really wanted to write his own version of it, and he didn't want to, participate in that. And I tried to convince him, and I, had, a number of emails and discussions, but I wasn't able to in the end.
Very, very interesting. So what went wrong from your perspective?
The actual answer is a little bit kind of disappointing in a way. I mean, everybody wants to point a finger. You have, 2 Israelis, 3 opinions. And it was almost like a national pastime in Israel to try to figure out, what sank Better Place. It was the government. It was Renault, the car manufacturer that Better Place worked with. It was the chairman of the board, Idan Ofer, one of the richest men in Israel at the time, who put in the first 100 million and then another 100 million. Or no, of course, it was the CEO, Shai Agassi. And I guess the real answer is actually kind of one that's common to all businesses. It just happened on a bigger scale for Better Place. When you start a business, you have to put down a number of assumptions into your business plan. How much you think the car will cost, how many people will buy it, what the response will be, what your costs will be. And this is normal. You put the assumptions into your spreadsheets, and then you update it as it goes along. And things always change. In Better Place's case, everything seemed to change. All of those assumptions they based the company on changed, sometimes almost at once. And Better Place was constantly trying to play catch up, trying to figure out how to deal with these changes. And ultimately, the changes became too great for the company to compensate. So just to give you one small example, the car was originally meant to be either free or inexpensive. That was the way that Shai Agassi sold it. That's the way he presented it on stage. It's going to be cheaper than a gasoline-powered car. It might be free with a monthly subscription for electric miles. But when the car came out, it cost the equivalent of about $35,000. Now, that sounds like a lot, certainly by U.S. terms. I'm not sure about in South Africa, but in Israel, it actually is not that much. It's about the same price you would pay for a Toyota Corolla or a Mazda 3 or a Honda Civic. The problem was that people heard free or inexpensive, and when they heard $35,000, their first thoughts were, well, this company's trying to gouge me. It's greedy. I'm not going to be a friar. I'm not going to be a sucker and buy that $35,000 car. I'll wait until the price comes down. That price was high, not because Better Place wanted it to be high, but that's the price they got from Renault, the manufacturer. Renault sold the car to Better Place for the equivalent of about $31,000, including all of the taxes that the government put on. And there was no room to bring the price down to free or inexpensive, and that was a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess price is an issue. I'm trying to think in South African terms. It's probably around 360,000 rand. So that is, I suppose it is standard price for a new car, but it's still expensive. Now, they sold a whole bunch of cars already before the company failed. And what happened to those people and their cars after the company collapsed?
You mean people like me, right?
Yeah, exactly. You had a car, and now what?
So interesting. The drivers of these cars did not want to give them up. There weren't that many of them. There were only about 1,000 of us in Israel, and that's way below originally they predicted they'd sell 14,000 cars in the first year alone. And it dropped down to less than 1,000. But we loved our cars. We didn't want to get rid of them. It's funny, even though we could no longer drive all over the country because the switch stations were closed. We could only, first we could drive 120 kilometers, and then car batteries are like cell phone batteries or laptop batteries. They deteriorate over time. They become less. They get less range. So first we could drive from Jerusalem, where I live, to the airport, and then we could only drive to the city of Modi'in, and then we could only drive to the city of Beit Shemesh, and finally it was a city car. And even so, we still didn't want to get rid of the car. We wanted to keep it and drive it because we loved it so much. Remember, I told you it was a love affair. It still was 4.5 years later. So a group of us sued Renault. We sued Renault not for our money back, but to get new batteries. We just wanted to get batteries that would give us the original 120 kilometers, or maybe they have next generation batteries that would be even better. And Renault said, well, we don't have any more batteries. We've shut down the project where they moved manufacturing of the car to South Korea. We're not going to send batteries all the way back from South Korea. And so finally, after really 4.5 years since the company went out of business, they offered us a settlement. They agreed to pay us half of what we paid for the car originally, which is not bad after 4.5 years. It's not a bad depreciation. And we thought, okay, well, we could keep the car, drive it, only 20 miles or 30 miles before it runs out of juice, and then pay somebody to tow it away, or we can take Renault's offer. And we took their offer, and now I drive a gasoline-powered car.
Brian Blum talking to us about his new book, Totaled, which talks about the attempt to create electric cars in Israel. We'll be back just after the break.
Connecting our community. Choose life. Choose high. The 101.9 High FM.
101.9 Chai FM. I'm Benji Shulman, and this is the New Blue Review, speaking today to Michael Blum about his book Totaled, which deals with the rise and fall of the Better Place company. Now, Brian, often in Israel we have this culture of the startup nation, and everyone wants to be successful in a startup and bring technology to the world. You haven't written a book about that. You've written a book about somebody failing and not winning. Has that affected the reception that the book has got from the public?
When I first wrote the book and I pitched it to my agent, and she went out and pitched it to publishers, in New York. That was the first thing we heard is, people don't want to read books about failure. They want to read books about success. And so it was a hard sell to just get this book published. Ultimately, it did come out in print and ebook on Amazon and everywhere else, and it's been selling very, very well. But it's not what you would normally expect. I think one of the successes of the book is that it's not written like a business book. It's not like you're reading it and getting lessons about what to do or what not to do. I mean, although those are in there as well. Really, it's a narrative. It's a whodunit. I kind of describe it as Agatha Christie meets Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis, who wrote books like The Undoing Project and Moneyball. So there's that business sort of mystery element to it, but there's also all along that the company is going to die. So how did that happen? And it plays out in that kind of, narrative way that you are their way. It's kind of funny to say about a business book, but it's really a page turner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've read, I'm about a third through the book at the moment, and it certainly isn't a difficult book to read. It's very fluid, and you don't have to be a business person at all. And in fact, I mean, I love the Better Place project. When I first saw it, I didn't own a car, but I definitely had some of those Better Place stickers stuck up on my wall, and it was very cool for me. And it brings back some of the excitement around the whole project. Brian, these days the electric car, the fat kid in the canoe, is kind of Tesla, right? But do you think that Better Place actually contributed to the furthering of the industry in any way, even though it failed?
Ironically, by putting out a model for a battery switch network, I think Better Place demonstrated that actually is not what people want. At the time, again, going back to 2007, it was really the only solution for providing the ability to go anywhere in the country and not worry about range anxiety. But batteries have gotten slightly better. The way that they put batteries into cars have gotten better. And this is key. Tesla doesn't necessarily have a better battery than the Better Place battery, even though it can go 3 times as far. It's just that Tesla has more batteries. They have 3 times as much battery under that car, and it's arranged differently. It's underneath the car as opposed to in the trunk. What we see is that because the Better Place switch station was not received, that well, and we see then that plug in, charge up in 45 minutes seems to be received better. I think the industry has moved beyond switch stations and is now really looking at plug-in charge, on the spot as the way for electric cars going forward. Now, to get there, we need better batteries. Even Tesla does not have a solution that is, I think, scalable and will move beyond really a niche. And what I mean by that is that people want batteries that charge up in 5 minutes, just like they can go into a gas station and fill up and go on their way. And right now, even the best batteries take 30 to 40 minutes to get to a full charge if they're at a fast charge station and they're all done with the battery. And people have said, well, you stop, you get a cup of coffee, you have a croissant or a Danish, and then it's 40 minutes and you're on your way. Well, I can tell you that we didn't want to do that. We were driving somewhere. The idea of stopping for 45 minutes on our journey, not interested. When I get a new technology like an electric car, I want to trade up. I don't want to trade down. I want my technology to be more functional and more bells and whistles. So I think that we're getting there. There are companies working on batteries like that. But until those batteries exist, I don't think any of the electric car companies are going to be more than a niche. And I think we learned that in part from the Better Place failure.
So coming up to the end of the show, Brian, how can people get hold of your book?
That's the easy part. You can go to Amazon and type in my name, Brian Blum. You can type totaled. You can go to my website, brianblum.com. Very easy to remember. And, all the links are there and you order it. If you're, in a place where, Amazon is active, you can get it in a day or two. They just ship it out. And of course, you can get it on Kindle or on iBooks or on Barnes & Noble, in electronic form, same day, within, 10 seconds.
Right. Well, then there you have it. Brian Blum, thank you so much for being with us on the New Blue Review, and Mazel Tov on your new book. Amazing, an interesting read, worthwhile going out there and getting it. Brings us to the end of the show for today. Thank you so much for everyone for listening. Thank you to Craig for pushing all the big buttons, Mandy who does all the production, and everyone at the station who helps put the show together. If you want to engage with us, please feel free. You can tweet me at Benji_Shulman. I will happily tweet back or follow us, and we'll chat to you next week on the New Blue Review.